Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this presentation. My name is Michael Gallagher. I'm the director of the Foster Center, and I'm delighted that John Stevens has agreed to do this presentation, which is essentially about navigating the job market. And he has a wealth of tools to share with us today. This is an effort on the part of the Foster Center to reach out into the community. And I'm just terribly grateful that John is here and he's willing to share with us. And without further ado, I'll just turn it over to John.
Okay, thanks, Mike. We're going to bring up the PowerPoint here so everyone can see the PowerPoint. And I guess what I'll do is, I was thinking there would be some people here and some people on Zoom, but everybody seems to be on Zoom. So what we'll do is, when we're finished, I'll give you my email address. And if you want to send me your email, I'll send you the PowerPoint that we're going to be going through so you don't have to take a whole lot of notes. Okay? So with that, so I thought maybe we just start by, if each person who is on the Zoom, if you want to just tell us your name and the company you're from, and why you're here and what you're interested in, and that'll give me some idea of what to concentrate on. So who would like to start?
Okay. Hi, I'll be happy to. Hi. Okay. My name's Maureen Burness. I'm here because you never should stop looking for jobs and keeping yourself out there and being, just putting yourself out there to see what's there. Areas I'm interested in, I have teaching experience, I have library experience, I have management experience, I have editing experience. If you push me real hard, I could sing in a band. So anything that speaks to those skills, that's what I'm interested in. Thank you.
Thank you. Who else? Just make sure you're not on mute if you're talking.
This is John Wiedemann. I'm just interested in hearing what's new. It's been a while since I have a job, but like the previous caller, never hurts to keep your eyes open.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Ellen Crino, same, just looking at what's open.
Okay. Did it? Okay. Well, this is who I am. I teach in the management department here in the School of Business at St. Bonaventure, and also for many years have operated a consulting and training company called J.D. Stevens Organizational Solutions, which took me out into the community and working for a lot of different businesses and industries and organizations in the southwestern New York and northwestern Pennsylvania area. So what I'd like you to think about today is what your expectations are, what you'd like to learn from today's session relative to, we're going to talk a little bit about interviewing and resume writing, things like that. We're going to go fairly quickly because this session will go from now until about 3:30. But as I said, what you're going to see here on the PowerPoint, I'd be happy to send you this information so you don't have to take a lot of notes as we go along. So some of the things we'll talk about are the job description, application process. We'll talk about some legal issues, the interview itself, both structured and unstructured interviews, some different kinds of questions, behavioral and situational, open and closed questions, and some different formats that some companies use when they're doing interviewing, and some of the things to keep in mind when you're looking to get a job. Also, we'll be talking a little bit about resumes, some different formats for resumes, how to build your resume, and we'll touch on just cover letters, and we'll have a bunch of internet types of things we're going to want to share with you. So hopefully, as we do this on the Zoom, we're able to navigate the jumping out and jumping back into the PowerPoint so we can show you some of the different tools that are out there that would be helpful to you. So to begin with, if you're about to look for a job, or if you have a job but you just think you want to keep my eyes open, a couple things you might want to think about is any job that you might be considering, to look at what the job entails, what an employee you think would have to do to perform that job and how they would do it. And the question is, when would they do it too? Because sometimes some jobs have different shifts. Sometimes some jobs require travel. They require you to work on weekends and things like that. The other thing is the job description. So if you're thinking about a job for the future, one of the things we'll talk about is what is a job description? Where can you go to see different job descriptions as examples so you can kind of get a summary of what the job would entail and some of the duties and responsibilities. And along with that comes something called the job specification, which typically will say what the skills are that someone is looking for, what level of education and degree might a job require, and if there's any experience that's required in the job as well. So job descriptions basically are designed to give you kind of an accurate picture of what the job is. And the fact is that jobs do change over time. Matter of fact, the technology we use here at St. Bonaventure in the School of Business, new software programs, new technology, new computers, new projectors, all kinds of things change from time to time. So we need to be thinking about, what the job entails, and thinking about, if we're going to be interviewing, what the company is looking for and what we might consider to be a recent job description for a particular job. A good place to look for job descriptions is on the bottom of the screen here. And I'm not going to click on this now, but when I send you the PowerPoint, if you bring up the PowerPoint like I have here, just hover over that line on the bottom. It'll take you to a website called Indeed, which we'll talk about in a little while. You can go in there and type a job in to the window in this area, and you can even indicate what area of the country you might be interested in. And it'll give you an idea of some of the job descriptions that might be available. For example, if we went into this and typed in accounting, it might ask, are you doing financial accounting, doing audit, doing fraud investigation? What kind of accounting are you talking about? When you get a little more descriptive, then it'll produce a job description for you to look at. And you can say, yeah, that's the kind of job I'm looking for. Or, gee, I'm not sure that's a perfect fit for me. These are the different sources that I wanted to share with you in terms of places you can go to find out more information. So I'm going to try something here. I think if I click on this, I'm not sure you're going to see it, so I might have to stop sharing and then come back in and share. But I'm going to click on this. And can you folks see this, or do I have to stop sharing and bring this up? Is it coming up on the screen?
Yes.
Okay. If it is, then this is a website. You can see it's called Built-in, BUILT.in.com. And if you click on that, you can click on jobs, and it'll show you different kinds of jobs. You can click on a job. For example, if we're looking at HR, you can click on that. And I guess it's not working right now. But you can click on different jobs. You can also click on companies. So if there's a particular company you're looking for, and there's different topics that they have that you can click on. Also, if you're looking for a job, if you click on a particular job, it'll give you some information on salaries, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But here's a little, if you click on this, it will show you all the salaries related to a particular job. But just to give you an idea that this particular website is called Built-in, and it has some kind of neat features to it. The next one I want to show you is called LinkUp. And if this shows up here, again, just to give you an idea how this works, let's type in. So you can see it says different kinds of accounting. So I'm just going to click on accounting specialist, and then we'll type in okay. And what it'll do is it'll show if there's any jobs in this area, you know, in a particular locality, within a certain, you can click in how many miles away you want to stay. So we'll say within 15 miles or so. And so here's a company, let's see, agency grant specialist trainee. So that's, but the idea behind this particular link up is you can go in and you can get very specific about the job, the location. You can sort by the best match or kind of the radius and so forth. And then as you go down, it'll start to pop up any jobs that will be available, or it may ask you for additional information. But we could spend, you know, a lot of time just going through some of these different resources. I just want to make you kind of aware of them. Another one that's very popular is called Indeed. And this one here, again, you can type in a job title up here. And then we say St. Bonaventure and find jobs. So it'll go out and it'll look for jobs. So here's a company that is looking for someone for a controller. But you can see there's information here on different jobs, and you can again tailor make it to the area you that you're looking for and so forth, and it'll give you an idea of the different kinds. There's a job that Zippo is looking for somebody for a payroll supervisor, and if you click on that, it'll give you some information. It may even give you a salary range for the job, but that's only if the company lists it. So that's not a guarantee. Another really good source is called LinkedIn. So if any of you are not in LinkedIn, I suggest that you may want to go into LinkedIn. It's LinkedIn.com. You can see at the top here. And I'm going to just sign in for a second. So I'll take my password. Okay, well, it's for some reason I got the password. I probably misspelled something there. But if you go into LinkedIn, there's a lot of information in this site. Just go back. And it offers you information on different kinds of jobs. You can put in there areas you're interested in, and it'll kind of focus on those kinds of things. You can if you're an employer, you can actually post a job in LinkedIn. So there's a lot of information in here that's really valuable. And having a LinkedIn account is nice because you can go into LinkedIn and start developing your resume there as well. You can enter information, about your past work history or skills you have or whatever. And then you can actually give people access to LinkedIn, and they can go in and look you up. So if you're looking for a job, you could say to somebody, if you go to John Stevens at whatever, you can get into my LinkedIn account and see a little bit about it. And then another very popular site to think about right now is called ZipRecruiter, and it says our the browser we're using here is out of date, but I'm not going to update the browser now. But if you go into ZipRecruiter, again, there's a lot of information in here. You can enter again the type of job you want, the location you're interested in, and so forth, and kind of narrow the focus. You can also upload resumes here and so forth, and then it helps to match you and your skill set to particular jobs that you might be interested in. And there's another website that I signed up for just for the heck of it a while ago. It's called The Ladders. So it's www.theladders.com. And I get little emails a couple times a week, and it will show me different kinds of jobs that are available in a certain area and what the salary range is. So in the Western New York area, here's a project operation individual that the job pays $100,000 to $150,000. It's in Tonawanda. Here's one in Rochester. Here's another one in Buffalo for global business process. So you can go into the ladders and again, put information in there regarding your general skill set. And then they'll actually send you emails that will give you some ideas on particular jobs that might be available that you might be interested in. If you click on them, you can go right through and learn more about the job and even apply for the job as well. So let me just stop for a second and see if anyone has any questions on any of those.
Actually, I do.
Okay.
Two things. One, at one point, St. Bonaventure had a had a specific LinkedIn presence. Is that still available? And also, you know, for Bonaventure alum, you know,
Yeah.
just sort of specific to Bonaventure. And the second question, and maybe you're going to be getting to this later, what is your thought on using a headhunter?
Okay, first question is about Bonaventure. If you're in any way connected to the university, an alum or a student or whatever, if you contact the Career and Professional Readiness Center on campus, it's called the CPRC, Career Professional Readiness Center. They can help you to set up a LinkedIn account. They can also show you how to access the Bonaventure LinkedIn account. And that's what they use a lot in terms of resourcing information about jobs. They also have another software package, which is fairly new called Handshake. It's HANDSHANK, I guess. And if you go in there, you can set up an account in Handshake and upload a resume. And then if a company is looking for someone, they can access Handshake and see who's uploaded resumes in there. And you can contact them directly, or they can contact you. So two good questions. One is about LinkedIn, which is a great resource, and you can obviously access the Bonaventure LinkedIn account, and then Handshake. As far as a headhunter goes, there's a couple of issues with that. Some companies use headhunters when they're trying to access talent, like today, because the job market is kind of tight right now. There's a lot of openings and a lot of key positions. So some companies will go to a headhunter. The problem with headhunters is they're a little bit, they're a curious bunch. If I went to a headhunter and said, I'm looking for this kind of a job, and here's my resume, and they were to hook me up with that job and actually give me that job, then the company that I go to work for has to pay the headhunter a fee for accessing and locating me. But once I'm there, after about a year and a half, the headhunter will call back and they'll say to me, hey, John, we know you, we just placed you in St. Bonaventure a year and a half ago. I just wonder if you're happy, because if not, we have another opportunity for you. And so companies realizing this sometimes hesitate to use headhunters because they know once you're in the headhunter's Rolodex or whatever, they won't hesitate to call back and see if they can pry you away from the company they just set you up with after a year or two. To try to link you up with someplace else. So it's not a bad idea to use a headhunter. I don't have any recommendations for headhunters in this area. I know the university uses headhunters, like when we're looking for a university president, there's a group that specializes in locating people in certain skill sets. There's a company, an organization that Bonaventure is working with to generate applicants for the permanent position of university president. But other than that, there's different other companies you can work with. But I would try some of these sources I just indicated to you first before going through the trouble and the expense and whatever of going through a headhunter. I hope that answered your question.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay. If not, but anyways, jump in at any time if you have any questions. So we need to think about if we're looking for a job, what you're applying for, and that means looking at a job description, and also looking at a company that you might be applying to. So a really good idea is if you were applying to a company for a particular job, you're going to want to look at see if you can find a generic job description that could be fairly close to what the requirements are and what the responsibilities would be for the job. But you also may want to try to go in and look at the company website and or go to some place called Glassdoor.com. So if you're not familiar with this, if we go here, what Glassdoor does is, you can see at the top here, and I have a Glassdoor account, but I don't want to go through the hassle of signing in and everything. But they'll show you information about jobs you might be interested in, also companies. So if you were to look up, for example, there's a local company right now that is downsizing, Dresser Siemens. And so if someone was applying for a job there, they may want to know if they're outside the area, didn't know much about the company, they may want to know that the company is downsizing right now, they're manufacturing Olean. So if you click on, companies and you start using Glassdoor, you can find out a little bit about the company. In particular, people might have posted some things about the company who work there, so you can get some kind of inside information. Also, when you look at a particular job, if you click on the Glassdoor and sign in and try to look for different information, one of the things that will give you is a salary range for certain jobs with companies that are represented in the Glassdoor database. And then you can even get into some information on interviewing within Glassdoor. There's a section for employers where if you're an employer, you could go in and you can do some certain things to see what people are saying about your company, or you can post a job or a bunch of different things. You see right here, it's a place where you can post a job as well. So again, we could spend the next 10 minutes just going through Glassdoor, but I just want to make you familiar with it because it's a great resource. A lot of people, both companies and people that are currently working but looking for another opportunity, use Glassdoor to find out about companies they might be interested in. So that's a little about Glassdoor. I want to just touch on the process of selection. So if you're thinking about applying for a job and you're thinking, what are the steps that are involved? On the screen, what you see right now is typically when there's a job that's posted someplace, most of the jobs today are electronic. So you're going to go into a website, click on application form and fill out the data, in the comfort of your home on your computer, because the day of paper applications is rapidly, diminishing. So you go in, you fill out an application blank and submit it. What the companies will do will start looking through the applications. When they find some that they're interested in, they may set up a screening interview, typically like we're using today, something like Zoom or what's the other one? Skype or things like that. Thanks. So you might go through some kind of a screening interview. If you do well in the screening interview, depending on the skill set that they require, there might be some kind of a test that they might have you want to do. For example, years ago, if you were applying for a position as a secretary, they may want you to type 35 or 40 words a minute. So they might have a test you could go to on the website, and they would dictate some things, and you'd have to type into a little box and hit enter, and they would see accuracy and your speed at typing. So there's all kinds of different tests that a company could offer as a screening process. If you make it through that, then you might go to a second interview, and that could either be a second live Zoom, or depending on how far down the process you might be, they might even invite you to their company for a live interview at that point. If you survive the second interview, the company is interested in you, they may start to do reference checks. And in order to do that, they'll probably ask you for your approval to contact former companies or whatever, so they can check on your past employment. They can also do a credit check, and they can do a criminal background check as well. And they have certain software programs they use to do that. If you make it to that point, they may make you a conditional offer. They might say, we'd like to offer you this position, and this is the salary range, and it's conditional on you passing the physical examination. So the offer is made first, and then they may ask you to submit to a physical examination, which would be appropriate for the job that you're applying for. If for any reason you didn't pass the physical examination, including, there's a problem with drugs or something like that, then the offer would be withdrawn. But once you pass the physical examination, then you're in a position where the company may go ahead and hire you. Does anybody have any questions on that process, just so you understand. And not every company follows all these steps. Most companies follow a good number of those steps. Okay. So the application form itself is something the companies typically design specifically for their company. And it's used as a kind of a pre-screening device. So if the company posts a job and they get 100 applicants, they might go through 100 applications and they may find maybe 10 that look really good, the top 10. They might find another 10 that they might put in the category of backup, and then the remainder probably will never hear from the company again. But once they have looked at your application, and most of them will do it electronically, one of the things they look for is keywords in your application and in your resume. And so they will start collecting data using the application form. It has to be non-discriminatory. So the days of them putting on an application, what's your date of birth, or what's your nationality, or do you have a religious preference, they can't ask any of those questions because they're discriminatory in nature. So they're going to ask just for basic personnel data, kind of your name, rank, serial number, where you live, how to contact you, a little about your education, background, skill sets. They'll ask a little bit about your work history. And some of them even have a truthfulness statement on there. And I won't get into that at this point, but it's something we're starting to see more of on some application forms. And then what you can do now is you can actually electronically sign application forms. So you're attesting that the information you put on the application is correct. Keep in mind, if you put something on the application form that is false or that is not completely accurate, that could be grounds for termination. If you're hired, and when we go back and look at, you say in the application form, well, I have a degree from St. Bonaventure, when in fact all you did was attend Bonaventure but never got a degree, then you've kind of falsified a legal document because you signed it. They say that's a reason for us to dismiss you. So you have to be careful that you're very truthful. A lot of people exaggerate a lot of things on application forms, and it gets them in trouble down the road. And companies know that people tend to exaggerate things, so they tend to look for that as well. And what the company looks for is what we call red flags, which we'll talk about in a minute. Things like gaps in employment, or if they put in their information requesting salary background from you, if it looks like you're at one salary range, then you drop down dramatically to take the next job, they're going to want to know why you went backwards financially to take the job. And you might have a very good reason for that, but that would be cause for them to ask a question. So there's different application forms out there. You can Google application forms, and this particular one is probably a little small for you to see on your screen, but it asks for your name, your address, telephone number, email address, so forth. And you'll notice it says right to work. This one here is from the UK, but it'll say, can you legally work in this country? They can't ask you if you're an American citizen, because that doesn't matter to a particular job unless there's a company that requires people to be like a defense contractor or something like that. But they can only ask, are you legally able to work in this country? And if you're on a visa or you have some kind of legal documentation that says you can work, then you just indicate that. In this particular case, this job requires you have to have some driving skills, so they ask questions specifically about that. At the bottom of the form, it asks for employment history. So those are just some of the kinds of questions you'll see on application forms, but many of them are different now as they're more and more electronic. Managers are looking for things on the application forms like, is it complete or did you leave anything blank? If you get in there and if you were filling it out by hand, or if you're doing it by computer and you're misspelling words and things like that, that's a red flag for companies. They also may want to know what your availability date is. And you need to think about that, because if you're working right now and you say, okay, this is a Wednesday, first week in September, second week, I could start working at your place next week. They'd be a little concerned because you're kind of indicating you're not willing to give your current employer a 2-week notice that you're leaving. So be careful about that. They'll also want to know relative to your education. They don't care if you attended a different school, they want to know if you graduated from that school and what the degree was in. If you have a lot of different jobs in a fairly short period of time, you're going to have a good justification for why you did a lot of job hopping. People that are early in their career do more job hopping than people who are later in their career. But sometimes it's required. You might work for a company, they went out of business after a couple of years, and you have to jump someplace else. So as long as you have justification for that, you're okay. Some companies may ask for your pay progression. They might say, when you worked at this company, what did you make? And there's a lot of research on that. Some people say you want to be careful about what you put down here because it could limit you. So if you say the last job I was at, I made $75,000, and you're applying for a job that the starting salary is $100,000, they might say, hey, if so-and-so is currently making 75, I bet we could offer an 85 or 90 and save us some money. So it's kind of something to think about in terms of whether or not you fill out this part of the form in terms of the pay progression. And I don't have a good recommendation for you because I've seen it both ways. I've seen some companies come back and say, well, we're not going to consider you unless you fill this out. Other companies, if you don't fill it out, we'll just move along. You might want to be thinking about, what your reason was for leaving your last job. The worst thing you can say is, boy, I left my last job because that really was a horrible place to work, and my manager was just awful, just a disgusting human being. Well, that's not, someone that's looking to hire you isn't necessarily, even though it might be true, you may not want to phrase it that way. They'll also be looking for job responsibilities. When you move from one job to the next, if you increase in the responsibilities level of jobs and so forth. And they'll also want to know if there's any gaps, again, in your employment history. And there may be, for a woman, it might be, yeah, I took a couple of years off to start a family, or someone else might be, they might say, gee, I got to a certain point in my career, I had enough resources, I wanted to travel the world, so I decided to take a year off. Those are all good reasons, but just be thinking about the gaps in your employment. So things to keep in mind if you're interviewing for a job, and that is, here's some legal things. Companies cannot discriminate against you based on what's called the Civil Rights Act. There's a couple of these. The original act was passed in 1964 and it was updated in 1992 and then it's been updated since then. But it prohibits companies to discriminate against people based on some of the characteristics here: age, sex, race, religion, and so forth. Just to stay with that for a minute, this is the reason why they can't ask you on an application form what your age is, your gender, your religion, your national origin. That shouldn't matter to a company who's looking for someone who has a certain skill set for a job. Why would they want to know any of these things as long as you're fully capable to do the job? This would just be one way for them to discriminate against you. They may gather this information once they hire you so they can demonstrate that they have a diverse workforce. But they can't ask these questions during an interview or on an application. Also, for those of you that are 40 and older, the Age Discrimination and Employment Act prohibits somebody from discriminating against somebody who's 40 years or older. And this goes both for people who are current incumbents in a company. So if you work for a company today and you're 50 years old, and you keep getting passed over by people are promoted into positions who are younger than you because maybe they think they can pay them less or whatever reason, you could have potential a case for age discrimination. Also, when you're applying for a job, they shouldn't ask you your age, but if you kind of get the sense that they kind of figure out how old you are and they continually are hiring younger people, but you're more qualified, that could put them in jeopardy of violating the age discrimination. They may have to actually defend themselves in terms of why they consistently hired younger people when you were more qualified. And this applies to companies with 20 or more employees. Also, there's the Americans with Disability Act, and there's all kinds of disabilities that people have today. This act was passed to ensure that people who had some kind of a disability weren't denied the opportunity for a job. And I'll just give you one quick example. There's a story about a guy who went into a company to apply for a job in a wheelchair, and he was applying for a job actually in accounting. And he came in and, they talked with him, did the interview, and when he was done, they kind of inferred that they couldn't hire him because the work area that he would be in, the desk was too low and his chair couldn't get underneath it. Well, unfortunately for the company, they were not willing to do something called a reasonable accommodation, which means they should have been able to just put a couple of bricks underneath the desk and lift it up so the guy in the wheelchair could get underneath it. So he's fully qualified to do that job in every aspect except for something that the company could reasonably accommodate him for, then he shouldn't be denied a job because of that. So if you have any kind of a disability, be aware that they can't discriminate against you based on that in either pre-employment or in actual employment opportunities as well. I don't know if anybody has any questions on any of those. There's a lot of other laws involved, but those are three I thought I'd just kind of share with you. And here's some questions that sometimes people are asked during an interview. Sometimes they're even on an application form, or they used to be, but hopefully not anymore. As you look at those questions, what you'll notice is that none of those typically have a direct correlation to a particular job. For example, if I applied for a job and they said, have you ever been arrested? I'd have to kind of think about that because unfortunately, unlike most people, I've got some speeding tickets in my time. And so is that considered a violation of the law? Well, I guess I could pay a fine, whatever. But that shouldn't deny me the opportunity to be a teacher at St. Bonaventure, obviously. So they can't even ask you about convictions of a job anymore unless it's related. If you were applying to a bank as a teller and you had a past history of embezzling someplace, by asking that question, that's kind of related. But other than that, unless the conviction was a direct correlation to the job, you don't even have to answer it. Okay. If you're in the military, they can't ask you about the discharge. So these are all questions that the companies are not allowed to ask unless there is a direct correlation. As an example, they can't ask you if you have a disability. They can say to you, can you lift 50 pounds twice an hour to do this job? If you're unable to do that because of a disability, and you say, no, I can't, then they can legitimately deny you the job because you don't meet the job requirement. Not because you have a disability, but because there's a specific part of the job that maybe they can't accommodate you at. And as a result, the job wouldn't be a good fit. So keep these things in mind. If you're asked any of these questions, they say, how old are you? You can say, I'm older than 18. That's all you have to say. Or what's the minimum age to work? You have to be 21. Okay, I'm older than 21. That's all they need to know. Citizenship, they can't ask you, are you an American citizen? Again, unless it's a bona fide requirement of the job. All they can say is, are you legally able to work here? If you have a visa or whatever, you just say yes. So these things typically have no relation to the job, which is why they can't ask these kinds of questions. Now, in an interview, if someone was conducting an interview from the employer's perspective, I wanted to kind of share with you a little information about what it looks like from the employer side and how they typically will set up for an interview. So the first thing they typically have is a cover sheet, and then they'll have what we call a scoring sheet, and then they'll have questions. So just to show you what it looks like, if you were applying for a job and a company had a pretty well-developed interview form that they were going to use to interview you and other candidates for maybe a position in customer service, they may identify several skills or knowledge areas that they want to interview you on, and then they might rate them. So you can here you can say, well, let's see, for customer service, we think the most important thing is someone has to have good listening skills. And the next most important thing is both judgment and tolerance for stress, and then being able to plan and organize in terms of taking orders and doing certain things. So they will set up a sheet, something like this, with key skill areas they're going to interview for, and then weight them in terms of which are the most important. Then what they're going to do is they're going to set up a kind of a skill area sheet. And they'll look at what's the skill or knowledge they're looking for. And then they'll design 2 or 3 questions to ask relative to that skill. And then they'll have room on the bottom for notes and a place at the very bottom where they may rate you on a scale of either 1 to 5 or 1 to 7 or sometimes 1 to 10. So how does that look? Well, if they were looking for someone in customer service, one of the things they might be interested in is conflict resolution. So they want to know how good someone is at resolving conflicts. So a question that they might ask is, think of a time when you had a conflict, coworker. What was the issue and how did the conflict begin? And maybe was it resolved? And then you have to answer that question. Keep in mind, they ask you about a specific incident when you had a conflict with a coworker. If you respond by saying, oh, I'm really good at handling conflict, I don't have any problems with that at all, you didn't answer the question specifically. So they're going to ask you to think back to a time when you had a conflict. And so you can answer the question and they can rate you on your answer. And so having done that, then they'll have a scoring sheet that looks like this. So on the left column, as planning and judgment, customer service, these are the things that they're skills they're looking for. You can see the middle column is WT is for weight. So they're thinking in this case, the customer service questions are the most important. And then on the far right, you've got the candidates. So on the top, you've got candidate 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Below each candidate is the rating they got for the 4 or 5 different skills or knowledge categories. And what they'll do is they'll, as they go along, they'll add up, their scoring of how well you did answering the questions. And then when they're done, they'll do just a numeric calculation to see, who did the best in terms of the different categories. Okay, and they'll typically multiply the rating they give you times the weight. So if you got under judgment, if they weighted that a 7 and you got a score of a 3 based on your question, then you got 21 points for that. And then they'll total up. So for candidate number 1, using this little example here, the candidate number 1 got a score of 106. And that's one way that companies will be able to compare one candidate to the next based on the questions they asked and how they felt each candidate scored in that category. Does that make sense?
It's great. Very interesting.
Yeah, and so this is both helpful, I think, to you if you're as a job seeker, but also if you're working someplace and you're going to be interviewing someone as an employer. You may want to look back on this, and there's a lot of stuff you can Google on how to set up a job interview as an employer, and they'll have similar kinds of information that are like this. So I guess I have a question at this point. If anyone has a job that they would like to interview for, if you want to give me what that job is. So somebody who maybe is watching, if there's a job you're thinking about, you might be interested in, you want to just share, I just need one job title to start. Anybody? Okay, well, let's say somebody said accounting. So I would say then, what are some of the key skills an employee would need to have to be an accountant? And for example, if an accounting degree was required, you may go to the St. Bonaventure website and look at an accounting degree and see what kind of courses students take. You might even go and look at course descriptions to find out what they learn in those particular courses to give you some idea of the skills that someone would need to be successful in a position in accounting. And then you need to look at those, whatever is required, and say, well, which of these are the most important? Because I want to make sure if they ask me a question on that, I have a good answer on how I would do a particular activity or what my experience is in a certain area. And so you want to be thinking about, what the question is that someone might ask you in that particular area. And it might be something like, tell us about a time as an accountant when you found a discrepancy in the books. What was the discrepancy? How did you handle it? What was the result? So you need to kind of start anticipating questions so you can practice at home in terms of how you would answer some of those questions. And once you have an idea of what the scoring sheet looks like now, you can kind of figure out how that answer might fit into the scoring sheet, how you might be scored based on maybe a comparison of you and how other people might answer. So what you may want to do later on after this presentation, and once you send me your email and I send you the PowerPoint, you may want to pick a job and identify 4 or 5 skills that you think are required for that job. And then thinking about that, maybe try to determine which of those 4 or 5 skills are the most important, so kind of weight them. And then from that, start to thinking about anticipating the kinds of questions somebody might ask you relative to that. And we're going to talk more about that in a minute. So if we had people in the room, I would ask people to share at this point if they have a job that they're interested in, what skills they came up with, and what questions they might think might be potentially a good question for an interview. So regarding questions that companies may ask you, an employer might ask you, you might want to think about how you prepare for an interview, and what questions you can anticipate. And think about this: a lot of times people go into a first interview and they do reasonably well answering the questions, but then they leave without doing a couple of key things. They forget to ask at the end of the interview some questions about the company. Like someone might say, "Yeah, I'm really interested in your company. Thanks for the opportunity. Can you tell me about what would be some potential for me in this company if I got the job?" In other words, what other areas might I be looking at as a career progression? Or you might say, "Could you tell me a little bit about the culture of the company? What is it like to work here? Is it a friendly, team-based, company, or what's it like?" It's okay for you to ask questions at the end of that first interview, just to show you're interested and maybe to demonstrate that you've actually gone on a website and learned a little bit about the company, and you want to confirm some things maybe that you found in your research. The kinds of interviews that people will conduct tend to typically fall into 3 categories: unstructured, semi-structured, and structured. And what this means is, and I've seen this, I've had personal experience. I worked at one company where they asked me to work with the manager who was going to do some interviewing for people in the computer department. And I said to the manager, "What kind of questions are you going to ask?" And he said, "I'm just kind of wing it. I'm going to, when I get in there, when I talk to somebody, I'll just ask whatever I think is appropriate at the time." Which sounded to me an awful lot like an unstructured interview, which is not a good idea for a number of reasons we'll talk about. A semi-structured is where you have some basic questions you're going to ask all of the people you interview, and then some you're kind of winging. And a very structured interview is kind of what I just talked about, where you have skill sets you want to measure, specific questions regarding those skills and experience, and the ability then to evaluate people based on their answer to questions. So it makes it much easier to select the best candidate because you have some criteria to use. So an unstructured interview might look like this: "Hey, welcome to the company. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Do you like to travel? How about those Yankees? Whatever." And we're kind of making up questions as they go. The problem with this is it's difficult to compare one candidate to the next if you're not asking same or similar questions. A semi-structured interview will have at least 3 or 4 standard questions based on skills that people are looking for. And then they'll kind of go off the reservation a little bit and ask you some questions based on your answers. And that's a little bit better than an unstructured. A structured interview sometimes is built on what we call the cone effect, where at the very top of the cone, you'll see they'll ask very broad questions. They'll say, "Okay, what's your current job?" "I'm an accountant." "Okay, well, tell us a little bit about some of the things you do as an accountant." And then as they start down into the narrowing of the cone, they may probe and say, "Well, tell us about some problem areas that you've had or some issues that came up or whatever." And they might get very specific about, have you ever seen someone, who did something illegal that you found while you were, conducting an audit or something? So this is kind of The cone effect is just something to keep in mind because oftentimes people will start with broad questions that lead to progressively more specific types of questions. And a very structured interview is kind of what we talked about a minute ago, with having a cover sheet and the weighted items, standard questions that everyone gets asked. And so even in a structured interview, they will still ask follow-up questions. So they ask you a question about something and they want to learn more information about that. They may very well continue to probe in that area. There's two types of questions that you'll get asked in an interview. One is called a behavioral question. And this is where they want you to tell them something specific from your past performance that you did, which they'll use as a predictor of how you might perform in the future. And I'll give you an example in a moment. The other kind of question you'll get asked is something called a situational question. And that's where they'll place you in a situation and say, what would you do if you were in this particular position? It's one way to gather information about your knowledge about something. So, these questions, behavioral interview questions, typically will start with, tell me about a time when you did something. For example, when you had a conflict with somebody, what did you do? How did you handle it? What else did you try, and so forth. And they're really probing to hear what you've actually done. So you're really going to have to think about a specific example. Don't try making something up or become generalized, because that's frustrating to someone who's asking a behavioral question. A situational question sometimes is asked to gather information. So here someone might say, what would you do, if two of your subordinates were having a conflict? How would you handle it? More importantly, or more common, the situational interview will ask questions like, what would you do if you were in this situation legally? What would be the correct answer? And they're trying to see whether you understand the legal ramifications or if you know what the law is in a particular area. So those are two different kinds of complementary types of questions. Be aware of what kind of question someone is asking you in an interview. An example of behavior questions, again, will be something like this. Tell me about a time when you saw someone, being rude. What happened? What did you do? How did you feel about the resolution? And they're asking the question because they're wondering, if you work for them, what would you do if you saw a similar situation? Because you've been in a position in the past, what did you do? They're using that as a predictor of what you might do in the future. So we're not going to do this now, but what you may want to consider is, if you're applying for or thinking of a job in a particular area, you might think about what kind of behavioral questions might somebody ask me? Would they want to know from my past experience what I actually did? And what kind of situational questions might somebody ask me as a way of testing me to see how knowledgeable I am about a particular area I might find myself in. So that's an exercise you can do later to think about how you can kind of handle it.
John, can I interrupt you for a second?
Yeah, please do.
Sorry. As far as questions that a person can ask the employer in the interview, if on the website there was no indication of pay, and no one has brought it up in the course of an interview, when is it appropriate to say, what's the pay? Because it seems to me that should kind of be up front, and would determine whether or not I would be interested in the job. But it does seem to be like rude to ask it in a first interview, or at least that's the prevailing wisdom. Is that still the prevailing wisdom? And the second question is, do you have any suggestions because often they ask that, why should we hire you? And that's always, it takes me aback. I mean, because I just gave you my resume and I just sent you a cover letter and I just told you all that. So do you have any suggestions for possible answers to generic questions like that?
The two very good questions, and thank you for the questions. The first one on pay. What I'm going to show you in a couple minutes, we already talked about Glassdoor and some of the other websites, but my thought is always before you go into the interview, you should have some idea of what that job typically would pay in the area where you're applying. So if you go to Glassdoor or someplace called salary.com or whatever, you can get an idea of what the salary range is. And you can kind of anticipate based on the kind of company where they might be at relative to that salary range. As an example, if I was applying for an accounting position locally at a large manufacturer that was looking for someone in accounting, I would expect that manufacturer is going to pay something very close to the midpoint of a salary scale for that particular position. If I was applying for a similar position at a company that's a nonprofit, I might expect that they might offer a little bit less. Okay, so what that does is going in, it gives you some sense of what the salary might be. So you don't have to ask the question of the of the company during the first interview, how much is the pay? Because it is sometimes it can send the wrong message. It can make it sound like the only reason you want to work here is because you're trying to make more money. And although that may be true, you may not want to send that signal. So I would say do the homework up front first, find out what the salary range is in a particular area for a job, and I'll show you that in a minute. And then you can kind of feel comfortable that if the company is competitive and if there's a lot of openings for this particular job you're applying for, and the number of applicants is kind of scarce, you can probably expect you're going to get something real close to the midpoint of what the job is worth. The second question was, help me with that again, the second question.
Generic questions, why should we hire you?
Yeah.
Things. Any suggestions for what your best answer is for that one?
Yeah, that's a good question too, and that comes back to how prepared you are for the interview. If you're, for example, if you were applying for a job as a training director at a company, where you're going to do training and development for that company, and the prior place where you worked, you implemented a training program on problem solving and decision-making skills, and as a result, you determined that the company saved $100,000 a year because people were using some of the skills that you taught them, then that would be one good reason for you to say, well, hey, if you hire me, here's what I did in my former job. I implemented this process. I developed this program. I oversaw the creation of this activity or this product or this service, and this was the result. That's your way of saying, here's the value you have in me that may be of interest to you in terms of hiring. Okay? So you want to sit back kind of and think of take an inventory. And if you just say, well, I work in accounting and I just do the books. And they say, okay, well, why should we hire you? Well, I'm good at doing the books. Well, there might be 10 people coming in after you to interview that might say the same thing. So how are they going to distinguish? If you say, well, I implemented a new bookkeeping process at the last company I was at, or I integrated a couple different software packages into a report that we were doing on a monthly basis, or something like that. That is the kind of thing that companies are looking for as a demonstration of why they might want to hire you. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. And it goes back to the old saying, the better prepared you are, the better your opportunity and the better your chances are of being successful. So it really requires you to do two things. Look at the job you're applying for, learn everything you can about that job and that company, and then look at yourself and really analyze what skills you have and what the achievements you've been able to realize in the job that you've done, and be able to to work those answers into a question in terms of things you've done that you think are selling points for you. So, as we're talking about questions again, these are 10 questions here that people used to ask during an interview process, which they really can no longer ask. So this kind of as a referral back to what we said a minute ago. But the issue is they typically cannot ask you these questions on an application form or during an interview, unless the question is directly related to a job requirement. So as you look at these 10 questions, here's the here's the response. How old? They can never ask you how old you are. Not while they're interviewing. Once they hire you, they might ask you. They might say, "Just we want to make sure from a demographic standpoint, we want to be able to determine, what the age range is of people who work here." But they can't ask you that during the interview. They can't even ask you if you're a convicted felon unless it relates directly to the job. Can't ask you about disability, nationality, religion. Only thing they can ask you about the citizenship is, can you legally work here? Can't ask where you were born, or are you married, do you have kids? Reason for that is, if you're going to apply for a job and they're going to provide health insurance for you, and you come in and say, yeah, I'm married and I got 5 kids, automatically they're going to think, boy, if we hire this individual, they're going to cost us a lot of money for health care. So the next person in the door says, yeah, I'm single. That's going to be a lot less expensive for them to pay health care for that person. So by asking that question, they can discriminate. And the last two about the driver's license only if it's required. And when they ask you about the school level completed, you can say, well, I graduated from high school, and I don't need to say when I graduated, what the date of the graduation is. A couple other ways of looking at questions are, some people will ask what's called open-ended questions, which cannot be answered with one word. It can't be yes, no, right, wrong, true, false, those kinds of things. An example is, tell me about a time when, which means you have to talk about something that you did in response to an open-ended question. A closed question is typically used by companies just to confirm data. They might say, do you have a degree in accounting? Yes, I do. Can you legally work in the United States? Yes, I can. Those are closed types of questions. They're just used typically to confirm data. Okay? But be aware when they're asking the questions, if it's open-ended, they're looking for you to say some things, they're not looking for a 1 or 2 word answer. So if you were asked a question like this, when did you graduate? You just need to say, I have a high school degree. If they say, how old are you? You can just say, I'm at least 18. I know you need to be 18 to work here. I'm at least 18. Are you a citizen? I can lawfully work in the U.S. and I can give you documentation to show that. Okay. Now, in answer to the question somebody asked a little bit ago about salary, and if you're interested in applying someplace and you want to know what they might be paying, you can go to this place called www.salary.com. And when this comes up, if you're looking for a job, we'll just go over here and say, I'm looking for the accountant, and we'll say Buffalo. Okay, so this is working. It should accept it. So it's going to say view salary here. So here's a plant accountant position. So there's different levels of accounting. If I say I want to know the salary for a plant accountant, when I click on that, view salary and benefits, it'll show you this. So this shows you, for that position of a plant accountant in the Buffalo area, the salary range goes anywhere from $59,000 to $100,000, with $72,200 being the median, or what's called the market value for that position. So now you're thinking about you're going to apply for a job as a plant accountant at a firm in Buffalo, and you want to ask the question, how much do you pay? Well, instead of asking the question, you go to salary.com, click on a few things like I showed you here, and you have a general idea of what the job should pay. So when you're applying for the job, you're thinking in your mind, if I'm fully qualified and have all the capabilities of the education, I should be looking at something very close to the median point, which is what's called market value. If I only have a couple of years of experience and they're looking for 5 years, then they might pay me something less than that, maybe down closer to the 65,000. Okay. If you've been in business for a while and you're an accomplished plant accountant, you might say, well, in order to hire me, they probably should be looking at something north of 72,000. So that gives you an idea of what the job should pay, which then gives you some comfort that if this is a quality company and it's been in business for a while and you expect they're competitive in their market, they should be paying something close to the market value for jobs. Does that answer the question that the lady who asked a minute ago?
Yes and no.
Okay.
In the sense that once you finally get it out of them, what they're going to pay you, yes, it helps to have a gauge. And, would you recommend saying, I mean, suppose they are not even close. You've done your homework for the area. They give you a number. It's not even close.
Yep.
Do you recommend saying, look, I looked this up on, on this for this area, this person, this group pays this group pays this. I was hoping for more like this. Is that a legitimate response?
I'm not sure I get that specific. I think going in, you have an idea like this from this graph, what the job should pay. What they may do to you is they may say to you, what are your salary requirements? So that's where this becomes of value to you. You might say, I think I'm fully qualified. I think I'm fully capable. I've got the education. You might say to them, I'm looking for something in the ballpark of 72,000 a year. And you can say that with the confidence that that's about what that job should pay. They can either say yes or no. They can say, well, actually, the salary range for our job goes from 70,000 to 86,000, and we may start you somewhere in between. You say, okay, great. If they say, oh, we can't give you 72,000, the best we can do is 55, then you've got a decision to make. You're probably not going to negotiate with them too much because they're offering you something way below market value. Unless you're desperate, I wouldn't think about going to work there. Because if they have a human resource department that's worth its salt, it's gone and done this kind of research and they know what they should be paying and they know what they're currently paying. If you come in and ask for something that's pretty close to what they should be paying and they're not willing to do that, then I would just keep looking.
That's why I'm here. But I have to say, I'm sorry, I am out of time. And I have to leave. So if I could get that, the PowerPoint sent to me, that would be lovely. And thank you so much. This has been very informative.
Well, good. My email address is the letter J as in John. So it's J, and the last name is S, then Sam, STEVENS. So it's J Stevens, JSTEVENS, and here at St. Bonaventure, so it's at SBU for St. Bonaventure .edu. So it's J Stevens at SBU.edu. And if you send me an email the next day or so, I'll just send you a copy of this PowerPoint.
That is awesome. And thank you so much. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Lori.
Thanks. Take care.
We just have a little bit more time, and I want to cover a couple more things here. So again, Glassdoor is another place where you can go in, and again, you can see along the top there where it says salaries, where you can plug in a job and a location. And that's another source. You can kind of compare from salary.com, Glassdoor, and see if they're equivalent. Keep in mind, if you get real specific, like an accounting position in Olean or in Allegheny, New York, they may not have a big database around here. In other words, a lot of companies around here may not have uploaded data on what they pay their people. So you might have to go in a little bit broader area like Buffalo or Western New York or something. Here's a couple things to think about during the interview. I wouldn't ask about benefits, because what you can do is you can go to Glassdoor in different places, and sometimes you can find out a lot about questions related to salary and benefits on your own. And I wouldn't ask about salary, because they're more than likely going to ask you. They're going to say, what are your salary requirements? And that's where you're going to have a fair answer if you want to be if you want to progress that way. Certainly don't ask them how did I do, and make sure you walk out as though you're very confident that you did a good job in the interview. And you may want to ask, a question like, what is it like to work here? What's the work climate here? What do people think about working here? And you might even tell the company that you're interviewing with that you have gone to their website and you know what they make or what they do or the market they're in and who their competitors are. That shows them you did a little research, and it can put you a step ahead of somebody else who hasn't taken that step. Okay. You typically get a job based on your resume, the application form, how you answer questions, their scoring system, how you compare to others, and if they do a background check, then the references and things like that. And again, the only reason they can ask you to submit for a medical examination is if they give you a tentative offer. Okay. So we have just a little bit of time left. I want to talk a little bit about resumes and some things to think about. Resumes, typically when they come into a company, if they're electronic or paper, wind up getting placed in one of three piles. The resumes that have done a really good job might get in the A group, and those are the ones that they're probably thinking about interviewing. They might have several that are pretty good, but not quite at A category. And they'll put those in the B category. So if none of the A people are available, they might go into the B pile and start, interviewing people in that group. And the C pile is the ones that they're typically not going to contact you back with you because you didn't meet some of the minimum requirements. When you're doing a resume, it can fall into one of three categories. If you're looking for an entry-level position, there's certain things to think about in the resume. If you've been working for a while and you're in a mid-level position, there's certain things you're going to want to put in the resume. And if you're looking at a senior position, in an organization, there's certain things you're going to want to put in the resume. And you can Google some of this information and see. The best source for you to get help for a resume, other than on campus here, the Career and Professional Readiness Center on campus, is locally the Western New York Cattaraugus One Stop Career Center. This is located right uptown in downtown Olean, right across from the Beef and Barrel. They're open from 8:30 to 4:30. That's their website. You click on that, you can learn more information about the Career Center, the One Stop. They have things available there like training money, where if you want to change jobs or you've been downsized, like people at Dresser who are losing their jobs because of the closing of the manufacturing facility, if they want to change their career, they could go to the One Stop and get money to learn to be a truck driver or something else that's a high demand skill. This would help them to transition into a new job with funding and training ability. Another source is the New York State Department of Labor. So that's the website for that. If we clicked on dol.ny.gov, that's the New York State Department of Labor. That's also located in the same building, 175 North Union Street, uptown. It's on the first floor. And if you go in there, you can schedule a time. They'll help you with the resume. They'll help you with the job search. Once you have a resume, they'll upload it to their database. And if an employer contacts them with an opening, they'll automatically link your resume to that job if it meets their requirements. Okay. There's different sources you can go to. I think a really good source, again, for resumes is the Olean Public Library. If you go to the Olean Library and go in and tell them you'd like to write a resume, they'll show you what they have in books on the shelf right there. They'll also show you, where you can go on websites at the library, where you can look up things like, free resume builder and how to create a resume for free and so forth. So there's a lot of resources there. And instead of spending time trying to help you develop a resume today, this is something you need to devote quite a bit of time to. But once you've located the resources, either at the library or from the One Stop or some of these sources here, it'll give you a good starting point on how to put a resume together. And you're going to want to think about, there's a couple of ways of doing it. A lot of people do it chronologically. They say, okay, well, my most recent job was this, and the job I had before was this, and the one I had before was that. That's kind of the old way of doing a resume. The newer way tends to be based on experience. So if you were an accountant, you might say, I've worked at 3 different places, but here's all the things I've done at the 3 different places. I've done this and this and this. And so you're listing in your resume all the skills or the knowledge or the experience you've had in the accounting function. And then at the bottom, you might say, here's the 3 companies I worked at and the dates I worked. But not to break the job down by the company, in a chronological thing. Because your most important feature that you have to offer is the skills that the companies are looking for. And when they look for people online, if you're submitting a resume online, if you do it the chronological way, the computer isn't as friendly to your resume as it is if you do it based on your experience. And this is an example here of a resume. And again, I know it's difficult for you to read, but if you Google, experience rated resumes, it'll have on the top the person's name, their contact information, a summary of the kinds of things they've done that they think qualify them for a job, the skills they have in the area that they think is important, and then in the category of experience, some of the major areas of experience they have. Okay? So that's one type of a resume that you can use. Here's another one, again, that has the summary on the top, the skills, key skills that someone would think they have that would be of interest, and then again, experience based on what the most important experience was, and at the bottom, the education. So for resumes, you can go to this particular location. If you go to careeronestop.org, that's an online service that's linked to the New York State One Stop and the federal One Stop, where they'll walk you through how to develop a resume. And you'll click on job search, resumes, you'll click on the resume guide, and it'll walk you right through how you can develop a resume for free. When you're done, it'll be in a Word document. You just download it to your computer. Okay, it's a great resource. Also, when you're working on a resume, think about the words that you put into the resume. If you say in the resume, well, I worked as an accountant and I did the books. Well, that's fine. But if you say, when I worked in accounting, I directed 3 other people, or I guided the implementation of a new software package, or I developed a new method for analyzing costs in the company, or I established a new policy or procedure. These are what we call power words. And you're going to want to make sure that you've got some of these in your resume, because when you apply electronically, companies have systems that will actually search resumes looking for keywords like this. They're looking for words that indicate that you did something, specific that they're looking for in terms of a skill. You supervised something, you initiated something, you launched something, or things like that. So this is, and you can Google power words and get these kinds of things very easily. When you're doing resumes, also keep in mind that you want to save it in a text format. Don't get cute and have boxes and graphs and pictures and things on it. Make sure you use a decent sized point size, like a 12-point. Courier is a nice font to use. Set your margins so you have a decent margin on either side, so the computer isn't struggling to try to get everything on your sheet, because you've got stuff from the left margin all the way to the right. Make sure that everything is flush on the left. Don't center your resume, and don't use tabs. When you're moving from one thing to the next, use a space bar to get to the next part in your resume. That again is helping the computer as it does the search for you. It has trouble with tabs a lot of times. And don't put the number of the page on the bottom. The computer will figure out whether it's a 1 or 2 page resume. For your cover letter, just a couple things to keep in mind. The very beginning of the cover letter, you're going to include, just some basic contact information, and how they can get a hold of you. The first paragraph will include a little bit of the reason why you're applying for this job. And you might start by saying something like, gee, I noticed recently you had a position advertised for this job, and your company is very interesting to me, and I'm very interested in this particular job. In the body of the letter, you might say, here's why I'm applying. I have this skill set, this knowledge, this experience, this education, kind of in a summary. Keep that cover letter to one page. Don't make it a book. And then at the end, say, I really would appreciate any opportunity to meet with you to discuss this opportunity. Please consider contacting me at the address, the email, the phone number listed above.
John, I have a question.
Yeah.
What is the current standard for who to address the cover letter to if you don't have a name?
Oh, really good question. Glad you asked that. What I always say to people is, if I was applying to Cutco Cutlery Corporation, I'd go on the website and I'd find out that Dave Copeland is the human resource manager. So I would address the letter to Dave. If I was applying for a position at Bonaventure in the finance department, I'd find out that Mike Gallagher is chair of the finance department. So I would say, dear Mike Gallagher. So do some research and find out who the people are in the company so you can address it to a name rather than just a position. If you have trouble finding the name on the website, call the place and say, if you call Cutco, you say, hey, I'm just getting ready to send a letter to Cutco. Could you tell me who your human resource manager is? And they'll say it's Dave Copeland.
Well, I'll tell you, I had that question recently and I called our Bonaventure's Human Resources Department and was told to put to whom it may concern,
Told
which
what?
I thought was antiquated.
I'm
And that's
sorry.
by one of the new people.
Can you repeat that, Colleen? You were told what?
To address it to whom it may concern. That was by one of our new HR people,
Well,
which I thought it was odd.
That's as a former human resource professional, I always think it gives you a leg up if you can find out who's doing the hiring and put the person's name in there rather than to whom it may concern.
I agree. We have
If
this
you
new
were-
online system, and her rationale was, well, it'll go to the right person. Don't worry about it. I thought, wow.
Well,
So
I can see why someone might suggest that, but if you're asking me personally what I would do, I'd be more inclined, if I was applying for a job in administration at the St. Bonaventure, I'd say, could you tell me who's in charge of administration? Oh, it's Dan Hungerford. Okay, thank you very much. And I would address it to Dan. And then when it goes to Dan, if it doesn't belong in Dan's desk, he'll give it to the appropriate person. But you want to
Okay.
get it to somebody who you think is more than likely the person that's going to be making the hiring decision.
okay, thank you.
That's my suggestion.
Thank
Okay? Good question. So that's basically what we have. It's just about 3:30. So I want to stop at this point and see if anyone has any other questions because, doing a job search, there's a lot of tools out there on the internet today that weren't there 20 years ago. There's a lot of different approaches you can take in terms of, getting ready for an interview, practicing for an interview. Here at St. Bonaventure, in the Career Center for our students and probably other people related to the university, they even have a mock interview device or tool where you can go in and download an interview, and it starts out with, you click on it and a face comes up and the lady says, oh, thank you for applying to this position. I have some questions to ask you. And then she literally asks you a question and you're at your computer and this is a recording obviously, but she'll say, okay, you're applying for a position in accounting at St. Bonaventure. Tell us a little bit about your experience. And then the screen says 3, 2, 1, and the camera is on you now. So the camera on your computer will record your response. So you can then take about up to a minute and a half to respond to that question. When you're done, the computer understands when you stop answering and it goes to the next question. When you're finished with the interview, you can play it back. And you can see her asking the question and you can watch what and how you answered that question. It's a great way to get some feedback on did you look nervous? Did you stutter? Did you talk too fast? Did you not answer the question properly? Did you give a generalized answer to a more specific question? So that's a really neat resource that we have in the Career Center that I think things like that are also available on the internet as well.
Wouldn't things like that be available? Like you could do that yourself on your own cell
Yes.
phone, is that right?
Yeah, you could get on Zoom and you can set up Zoom so you're taping yourself, and you could do that. You could have someone in your family ask the question off camera, and then with Zoom recording you on camera, you could answer the question looking at Zoom as though you were looking right into the eyes of the person who's interviewing you, and you could see how you look. And then when you get done, you could say to yourself, did I look confident? Did I look poised? Did I look, like I was in control and had a good understanding of the question? Did I do a good job answering? Did I go too long? Did I go too short? It's a great way to get some feedback on how you did.
Terrific idea.
Yeah, yep. And the more things like this, we tell our students here, the more research you do, the more practice you do, the more anticipation, the more understanding you have of the job, of the company you're applying for, of the salary range, of the history of the company, the market they're in, and look at things like, is the company doing well? I mean, I don't know if Siemens, the company, is doing well, but Siemens Dresser in Olean is laying off 400 people in the next 6 months or so. So it'd be helpful for you to know that if you were applying for a job. Other questions? Okay, well, if not, let me just let's see if I can just give you my email address one more time. So that's my email address. If you want to send me an email, I'd be happy to send you the PowerPoint that we just went through. It has all those links to different things. And when you pull up the PowerPoint and you put it into the presentation mode, you can actually click on the links like I did here, and it'll take you directly to LinkedIn or salary.com or ZipRecruiter or any of those things. And you can kind of, explore a little bit and see what's there and how it can be helpful to you. And you may want to set up a LinkedIn account. You may want to set up an account with ZipRecruiter and Indeed, some of those places, because it's a great place to upload your resume, and then you'll start getting responses right away. Okay.
You want to stop?
That's all I have.
You can stop sharing and.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
And when you send me if you go to my website, when you send me some information, just let me know what you thought of the presentation, anything I didn't cover that you were interested in, or if you have any comments on what we did cover, they go too fast or too slow, let me know that as well.
Thank you, John.
Okay, thanks very much.